إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطيع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. صدق الله العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, indeed all praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has blessed us again to gather on His Yom al-Jummah, this day of forgiveness, this day of blessing. And I remind myself and all of you that Friday is a day we should be looking forward to and get excited about. Not only for learning something about our tradition and our faith and our religion, but also looking forward to that opportunity to make dua, to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to remember His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, for indeed is a day of great blessing. We are now in the month of February, which in this country is designated as what we know as Black History Month, African American History Month, a time in this nation where we are supposed to reflect upon, to remember the sacrifices, the struggle of the African American community in this country, and to remember those who led that struggle and led and sacrificed much so that we may benefit today. And indeed, it was after years of struggle that many rights that were granted to them and then subsequently granted to others. So we remember in this month then. It is a time to remember also the plague and cancer of racism, which continues to spread and which continues to plague this nation's history. That in spite of all the legislation and education that has been done over the last 50 years or so, it continues to plague us. And we see this, we only need to turn on the news today, that what was even unacceptable 10 or 15 years ago to be saying in public forums, we see being said in houses of power, where we used to honor the likes of Rosa Parks and the sacrifices she made for freedom and against racism. And we see today talk show hosts who are perpetuators of hate and racism are honored with that same award. It is up to us, brothers and sisters, to join those in other faith communities to be that voice of moral clarity and to recognize and appreciate that struggle before us. Why? Why? Because we have that teaching that tells us of that moral voice. Where does racism begin? Where does racism begin? We are told by the social scientists that the notion of race itself is merely a social construct. What W.E.B. Du Bois had proclaimed over a century ago, it took maybe 100 years ago for there to be an agreement in the academic circles that race is a social construct. What does that mean? That there is nothing that is inherently different between quote-unquote one race and another. that races, in fact, don't exist. The color of one's skin means nothing biologically or scientifically. And that's why we have these ridiculous notions of 3 races and 5 races and 7 races and 9 races, because it is dependent upon a society defining itself socially how they're going to interact with people who look different than them. Ethnicities, yes, there is a legitimate origin of those. Nationalities, yes, because they share common linguistic characteristics, a common ancestor, etc. But race has no reality. It is something that was introduced into the world scene, and it existed in form before in different permutations during the colonial period, and resulting in the subsequent enslavement of Africans and others, where the European powers began to define themselves in relation to others based upon color of skin. The whiter you were, the better. The darker you were, the more cursed you were. This is where it begins from. From the likes of Isabella, Queen Isabella, the one who sent Ferdinand to discover this world and begin the enslavement of the Native Americans here, who began what? This notion within her own country herself to get rid of not the religion of Islam, the Muslims, but to get rid of the demonic numor, the Moor. The Moor to her was what? Dark. The Moor to her was what? Something foreign that doesn't belong. And she created a mythology of this, which permeated throughout Europe. That Muslim, by definition, is not even a religion, is a race that needs to be expelled. And you can follow her trajectory and what she did, and those who followed her afterwards. Race, something that we have been plagued with since what, the 15th century, and spreading throughout the world. But where does it begin for us theologically? Theologically, it actually begins in the beginning. Race, brothers and sisters, and the concept of race and racism is not an Adamic quality. It's not an Adamic problem. It's not something that comes from the human being, but actually comes from the satanic realm. Satan himself. And this is why we have to speak with clarity, because racism is a satanic concept. It is not the failing of a human being, it is coming from evil itself. When Iblis said to Adam, I am better than he because I am made of fire and he is made of dust, or comes from clay, what was Iblis using as the measure of his betterness? This is not merely arrogance, brothers and sisters. Arrogance is when you feel pride in something you did and you look down upon others. That's Adamic. That comes from the human failings. Racism is something else. It goes beyond that. It says, I will judge you based upon something I have done that had nothing to do with how I'm made, how I look. That will be the measure by which I judge the other. Iblis had many things he could say he was better than Adam about. When you study the history of Iblis, how close he was to God and what he did and how long he lived and his intellect, etc. Many things. But he chose the one thing he had nothing to do with. He was made of fire. Iblis had nothing to do with that. No free will, no choice in that. Adam had nothing to do with the fact that he was made from clay. And that's the one thing he used as a measure to judge that he is better than the other. It is arrogance plus. Beyond mere arrogance. Arrogance, yes, is a problem. That's for another time. People think, I did. Sometimes we coax to the language, by the grace of Allah, I did. Be careful, brothers and sisters, what we take credit for, and how we take the credit, and what our intention behind our words are. But we're not talking about that.
racism continues to plague us, even today. Let's take a moment and remember today. I'm going to share a few words because it's 2 weeks from today that marks the 55th anniversary of the passing and the martyrdom of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. On February 21st, he was gunned down in Harlem. Rahimahullah, Malcolm X. And I want to just share a few words because his words resonate today more, maybe even than during his time. And it speaks to us today as it spoke to us back then. And specifically, especially as we are in this month and celebrating these heroes as Muslims, he is addressing us as well, that we have to be people of that moral conscience, that speak truth on this subject. And what he saw and witnessed, we don't have time to go through his biography, what he saw and witnessed in his journey in Hajj and his coming to the realizations of the teachings of Islam, and considering his background, the impact it had, and the impact he continues to have over so many today. So bear with me as we share some words of that great martyr, so many years after his passing, as he's describing his Hajj ritual. There were tens of thousands of us from all around the world, from all different colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans. But we were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe never could exist between the white and the non-white. America needs to understand Islam. America needs to understand Islam. This is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem. Throughout my travels in the Muslim world, I have met with, talked to, and even eaten with people who in America would have been considered white. But the white attitude was removed from their minds by the religion of Islam. I have never before seen sincere and true brotherhood practiced by all colors together. You may be shocked by these words coming from me, but on this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions. This was not too difficult for me, for despite my firm convictions, I have always been a man who tries to face facts. I have always been a man who tries to face facts and to accept the reality of life as new experience and new knowledge unfolds in it. I have always kept an open mind, which is necessary to the flexibility that must go hand in hand with every form of intelligent search of truth. During these days here in the Muslim world, I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, slept on the same rug, while praying to the same God, with fellow Muslims whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And in the words and deeds of the white Muslims, I felt the same sincerity that I felt among the black African Muslims of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ghana. We were truly all the same brothers, because of their belief in one God had removed the white from their minds, the white from their behavior, and the white from their attitude. I could see from this that perhaps if white Americans could accept the oneness of God, then perhaps too they could accept in reality the oneness of man, and cease to measure and hinder and harm others in terms of their differences in color. With racism plaguing America like an incurable cancer, the so-called Christian white American heart should be more receptive to a proven solution to such a destructive problem. Perhaps it could be in time to save America from imminent disaster. These words of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz should resonate with us not only as Muslims, but as Americans. They should resonate with us in terms of the times we are living in. That the problem continues to exist. The problem continues to exist. But we have to first begin with ourselves and recognize it's a problem in ourselves. This is where we always have to begin. How do we view the other? How do we view the other? There is no shame in admitting that we come from cultures that were subjugated to colonial oppression for centuries. And as a result, we have internalized, many of us, those same tendencies, those same beliefs. What do I mean? We sit here and we listen to the words of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. You see, yes, Islam does cure racism. MashaAllah. But when we look at our own selves, are we victims to the same thing that we are criticizing the others of? You only have to travel the Muslim world or go through Southeast Asia. It's not even just a Muslim problem. Just stop in the airports and see what's there. White, beautiful. How many advertisements for skin creams that are destroying people's skin are advertised that make them whiter? Go to anywhere in the Muslim world, you will see this. Almost anywhere. White is better. Fair and lovely. These toxic creams we put on our children, even in this country, carrying on this institutionalized racism that we've internalized ourselves. We don't want our children playing outside sometimes in the sun because they will get too dark, especially our daughters. And we put these thoughts in their heads. That dark is ugly and white is beautiful. Where does this come from? Who said that? It's not a reality, except we've internalized it, many of us, and we live our lives and put these complexes in our children's heads that they live with the rest of their lives. Don't get dark. Nobody will marry you. Dark is ugly. How many of anyone who's involved in youth work knows this is the case in our community? How many youth coming forward, struggling with this in their own household? And yet we sit here and we proclaim on the outside Islam is against racism, and we're all about all different colors. But when it comes to ourselves and what we believe, we've actually internalized the discourse of the one who's been oppressing us. We have to begin with ourselves and get rid of these notions that have been put into our cultures and societies for generations and make a decision. It's going to stop with me. Maybe we were treated that way when we were young, when we were growing up. But I'm not going to bring that here. I'm not going to put those thoughts into my children's head. It will stop with me. Are we willing to do that and look internally, brothers and sisters? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us on this day of forgiveness. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala sayyidina wa habibina wa nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وحبيبنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Brothers and sisters, we have to understand the concept of being a victim to society and circumstance. We are not immune from the environments in which we grew up in. What it requires for us is to identify those problems or those issues that are antithetical to our teachings of Islam, so we can work on them and not to be oblivious to them. And this was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that what? The companions were victims of Jahiliyyah and thought patterns and a way of seeing the world. They did not come to the Prophet ﷺ, all perfected human beings, but came to him with much baggage. But through his guiding principles, through his blessed hands, they were taken out of this Jahiliyyah mindset and brought to an enlightenment and an understanding in a new way. But it took time. It took time for many of them. So you have the likes of Abu Dharr al-Ghafari, the great companion. After many years of being in Islam, gets into a dispute with Hazrat Bilal radiallahu anhu. And he mocks him with a Jahiliyyah slur, "O son of a black woman, O son of a black woman." Intending that this slur, what we would call a racial slur today. It wasn't descriptive. Obviously, Bilal's mother was black. But he meant it in this Jahiliyyah way. When Bilal came to the Prophet ﷺ and told him, the Prophet called Abu Dharr and inquired, "Did you in fact say this?" Abu Dharr said, "Yes." Why did Bilal go there, by the way? Was it really for his own sake? Or was this really what love between brothers is? That he knew it wasn't for the likes of Abu Dharr to be saying these things. Abu Dharr doesn't need to die with these thoughts in his head. But that's another discussion. This is what love between the companions was. Not for themselves, but for the benefit of the other. When he asked Abu Dharr, "Did you say this?" the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, "Yes." And he said, "Abu Dharr, you still have Jahiliyyah in you. After all of these years, being a Muslim, praying, fasting, yes, you still have Jahiliyyah in you. You have to get it out." What does Abu Dharr do? Does he argue? Bilal did this to me, he did that. What are you talking about? Papa, I did this, I. No. At that moment, he recognized, and he threw his head on the ground and said, "Oh Bilal, put your foot upon my head." To remove that Jahiliyyah from it. We have to be honest with ourselves, brothers and sisters, and look to ourselves. If we have these remnants of Jahiliyyah in us, of how we view others who look differently than us, especially when it's based upon color of skin, but even in other realms, whether it's ethnicity or nationality or what have you, we have to be honest with ourselves. We don't want to go and die with these in our hearts. These are satanic thoughts and qualities. We don't want it. First, identify it within yourself and work toward addressing it, brothers and sisters. And be that moral voice of courage that stands against these notions that we're seeing resurrected or coming back more amplified in society. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us on this day of blessing. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us. Ya Allah, those of us who are sick, we ask that you cure us of that sickness and illness. Ya Allah, those of us who are in debt, we ask that you alleviate that debt. Ya Allah, those who have passed away this past week, we ask that you grant them Jannah. Ya Allah, we remember the father-in-law of Qadi Abdul Basit, Imam of NBIC, who passed away this week, that you grant him Jannah and for those. We ask that you bless his family and give them sabr during this time. Ya Allah, we ask that you bless this community with people of righteousness, people of self-correction. Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask that you bless this leadership, the leadership of this community and communities all around the United States, with leadership that is pure in mind and clarity of heart and guiding the communities. Ya Allah, we ask that you would shower your blessings upon us to make a love in our heart for your beloved Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.